Hey everyone, I'm Matt, and welcome to the Good Trouble Show. Today, Congressman Robert Garcia of California and Congressman Glenn Grothman of Wisconsin crossed party lines to put forth legislation to empower civilian pilots, not military pilots, civilian pilots to report their encounters with UAPs, otherwise known as UFOs. Today, we have one of the co-founders of the nonprofit Americans for Safe Aerospace who helped draft this legislation to discuss the details on what airline pilots are not reporting. But first, do us a solid and hit that subscribe button and thumbs up button. You can find us on YouTube at on Twitter at Good Trouble Show, and everywhere else you can find us at The Good Trouble Show. Also, we need help keeping the lights on. You can donate by going to www.patreon.com/The Good Trouble Show, and for the price of a Starbucks, you can help us keep the lights on here. Also, super chats are open and are a great way to show your love, and we always appreciate your comments, thumbs up, all that kind of stuff. Those are the things that the algorithm looks at and helps promote our content to the people that do not follow the UAP topic, which unfortunately there needs to be a lot more of that. Also, we're on all the podcasting platforms. Just go to your favorite podcasting platform and search for The Good Trouble Show. And so Happy New Year's. We're glad to be back. So let's move on here. So our next guest is a software engineer and co-founder of the nonprofit Americans for Safe Aerospace, here to discuss this new proposed legislation. Please welcome tongue-tied first show back for the year, Brad Crispin. Brad, how are you?
Hey Matt, I'm great. I'm pretty excited about what's going on and thrilled to be here.
Excellent. Yeah, we are too. So we're very excited. I think as well with the gutting of the UAP legislation with David Garcia. I think this is excellent news. So what did you do for the holidays?
I had my kids, a lot of family in town, so I was trying to avoid, I think, the cold that you got. Both my kids got sick, but other than that, everyone made it through, and we had a great time. So can't complain.
Yeah, I think I came down with that RSV thing that just completely kicked me in the butt. It was it was not fun. Ended up with walking pneumonia, and yeah, man, it was not a pleasant experience. But hey, glad to be back, and glad to be back for the year. So before we get into this legislation, I'm always interested in hearing how people got involved in this topic. Was this something started for you as a kid? What made you wake up one day and say, you know what, I'm going to look into this whole UAP thing?
Yeah, great question. So it was not on my radar growing up as a kid, really. But I was working, and a guy that worked for me at the time, who's a good friend and is now a colleague, Austin Alexander, he's on Twitter, introduced the topic to me and said, I think it was around 2016, and said, hey, Brad, there's something here that you should really, it was actually, hey, boss, there's something here that I really think you should look at. And he was very persistent and gentle and kept inviting me and started showing me different sources. And obviously the New York Times story came out in 2017. And then I spent some time, following his suggestions and looking into, Leslie Kane's book, UFOs and Generals, Ross Coulthart, Plain Truth, in Plain Sight, excuse me, and just other resources like that kind of got me up to speed on some of the basics. And I just found it to be a fascinating mystery, that there's a tremendous amount of information out in the public. And when I started seeing the statements being made by, prominent politicians and intelligence officials that had access to classified information, I was blown away. And I just felt like, that this deserved more attention from the public.
And I understand you came up with this thing called the UAP Guide. Tell us about that. I'm going to bring it up here.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so UAP Guide is how, I guess I got started in this area.
There we go. I'll click the Get Started button.
Perfect. Yeah, and so UAP Guide is something that I built and user tested beginning, I think, about a year and a half ago. Since that time, a couple 100,000 people have read it, which has been really exciting. But I wanted to try to distill in just about 15 minutes, some of the information that I found most compelling. And so specifically, I looked to people like my mom, who knew nothing about this and wanted to both provide a series of quotes and then also some resources for people to follow up on and get up to speed. So, when, just collecting these quotes in one place, and then also, not writing anything myself was one of the key things that I think made it interesting to people and easy for people to understand that I'm not adding a narrative to this. These are just the things that, presidents and senators and directors of national intelligence have said. And when we look at them all in one place, we can kind of see, okay, there's something here that's worth our attention. So that's how I got started.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I understand that you've received quite a few endorsements on this this UAP guide.
That's right. Yeah. So when I first put it together, I started sharing it with people, and the response was extremely positive. I think, Chris Mellon and Hal Puthoff were two of the first people who were, just when they saw it, they were pretty excited about it. And I was just like, hey, would you be willing to recommend this? Can I say that you recommend this? And they were both quite generously willing to do that. And so I started just reaching out to people and sharing. Nick Pope also, just a number of people, and over time kind of made the rounds, and it was got a lot of great feedback. Lou Elizondo ended up endorsing it. Ross Coulthart. Eventually Leslie Kane, just kind of people are like, hey, this is cool. So I think it's nice to be able to present something that, represents kind of a consensus in a very complex topic that, there's some serious people agree that this is a good set of things just for a 15-minute introduction. So, that's the goal. And I've tried to keep it up to date, although I do have a whole section on David Grush that is still not yet published. So that's coming, but it's like there's a tremendous amount of material to work through. And so I've just tried to keep some of the updates in there, but it could use a little bit more recent information too.
Yeah, maybe you might want to wait to update the David Grush section until after he puts out this op-ed that I think everyone is really looking forward to. So since you started this UAP guide, are you just inundated with emails from people telling you about their personal sighting or experience?
No, not at first. That's when I first put it out, the feedback was very much just about UAP guide on its own, and that's actually how I first met Ryan. He reached out and just told me like, hey, great job, and so then we ended up talking and developing a relationship, and that's how it started going. And but no, it didn't immediately lead to witness outreach at that time. Yeah.
Now I understand that I think I'm correct in this. You met your wife through this?
That's true, and I was doing something very specific. So I met her in a normal way, but at work I'm a software engineer and a product manager, and one of the things that we do in tech product management is just show people your work and get feedback, right? So I started taking the set of quotes I had and user testing it with people that I knew. And I was particularly curious about why there were, more men seemed to be, just apparently interested in the topic, and what were their differences there? Was there something that, I was missing? And Haley Haley Morris, who's was the first person that, I showed this to, and I said, for we're going to be dating, I should get your feedback on this. And she loved it. And I got great feedback, and I showed it to a number of other people. And but working with Haley was a joy. And we started working on that together. And then things progressed from there.
Here's a lovely photo from your wedding there. You guys look absolutely great. So yeah, I think that was probably a really good idea, giving her a warning that you were into this UAP thing. I think my wife kind of scratches her head as far as how what she got herself into. Of course, my interest in UAP didn't come until much later in our marriage. So I think that was really smart, letting her know ahead of time. So clearly she's really interested in this as well.
She's our secret weapon. Yeah. So her background was in, so, she spent a decade on the Hill, and working in comms director roles. And then more recently, she moved into tech. She led the PR practice and strategic communications at Waymo, the self-driving car, and then also Cruise, same deal. And then a few years ago, she transitioned out. She's been doing consulting. And so she brought a tremendous background both to UAP Guide and the things that we've worked on together since then.
That's great. So, okay, so let's move on to Ryan Graves. So how did you connect with Ryan? Ryan, of course, is the former Navy F-18 pilot that encountered these UAPs in the air. How did you initially meet up with him?
On Twitter. So, he saw UAP Guide when it went out. I think he was one of the first people to reach out to me. And then, maybe a month later or a few weeks later, he put out a call for volunteers at the AIAA, the American Institute of Aeronautic and Astronautics. It's a mouthful, but it's the largest professional organization. It's about 30,000 folks in the aerospace industry, mostly engineers. And it's a volunteer group that he was convening to try to work on the UAP problem from the engineering side. And so I filled out the form to volunteer for Ryan, met him, and over the next few weeks ended up taking on a lead role there where I ran operations and led a recruitment effort. So started working with Ryan to build out the AIAA's engineering team. I think we've got like 60 or 70 PhDs and engineers working there now. And we made a ton of progress on that. And then we got to the point where I said, okay, this is fantastic, but there's work to do on the public education side. And so at that point, when we decided to start Americans for Safe Aerospace, I rolled off of AIAA and have been fully focused on that since then.
And am I correct? This is a nonprofit?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
We incorporated as a nonprofit. We're a 501c3.
Excellent. Now, who else is besides yourself, Brian, and Haley is a co-founder, I understand as well. Who else is involved in Americans for Safe Aerospace?
Sure. We've got an incredible group of advisors. So we, both subject matter experts and thought leaders in the space can, name some names. First of all, we're military pilot led. This is our identity. And we're really fortunate to have Alex Dietrich, David Fravor, Michael Green, also some names that might not be as well known, but are pretty, involved with this issue, like Sam Fletcher, and some commercial pilots as well, which form what we call our Air Crew Leadership Council. And these are the pilots that, really represent the issue. And then in terms of other advisors, across the board, Tim Gallaudet, who I know has been on your show, he's fantastic.
I love him.
Christopher Mellon, who's fantastic. Gary Nolan, Susan McHugh, who's not as well, may not be known as well in the community, but she was Harry Reid's chief of staff for a long time. Brian Bender, and then we've also worked to bring in some new folks like Mike Gold, who was a member of the NASA UAP Independent Study Team, David Radzanowski, who is the former CFO and chief of staff at NASA, and then more recently, Jay Stratton, who was the former director of the task force, has joined us as well. So we, and we try to, advisors and others. I mean, we try to talk to as many people as possible, to be smart on this issue and to make sure that we're, pushing forward in the right way.
So clearly you guys have some real heavy hitters as part of your organization. That's quite impressive. And congratulations on Jay Stratton joining as well. I think he'll absolutely be an incredible asset. So now I want to show this photo here. So this is you and Ryan here, and is this at the hearing?
This is a few weeks before the hearing. We were in Washington meeting with the Senate Committee on Armed Services related to our witness program. So when we founded ASA back in February, I think was the first Politico op-ed that Ryan did. And then our hard launch, our official launch was in June in NBC News. We began to hear from just a tremendous number of pilots and other witnesses, and this was not in the plan, right? Like, I mean, it was great, but we did not have a plan to have a witness program. But the volume of outreach we received and the compelling nature of some of the accounts that were being brought forward caused us to just organize against that problem set. And so we developed a formal process for, and again, we don't have a form. We're not a reporting service. These are just people that choose to send us emails, ranging from, civilians to commercial pilots, which we'll talk about, veterans, military pilots, even underwater stuff. And so, it was pretty remarkable to see the volume. And so we began to develop just a system of looking for cases where we thought that there could be some additional data for folks to follow up with, interviewing those folks, and trying to get that process started. So we met with the Senate Armed Services Committee about referring a few of our witnesses who had cases that might have some data for folks to follow up on and help inform some of the policy thinking that was going on at the time. This is pre-Disclosure Act coming out. So we got some folks to the Senate Armed Services Committee to share their accounts and their stories.
Do you find that the people that you speak to, like in armed services and on the Hill, they're taking this seriously?
Yes. I would say almost uniformly. Every conversation that I've had has been a serious conversation. I think there are conversations where, someone might be new to the issue, and so it requires an introduction. It requires a little bit of framing. But we approach this topic from a pilot perspective, as a national security issue, as an aviation safety issue, and then also as an oversight issue. And those are clear swim lanes for Congress to think about, and for staffers to think about as well. And if you are able to have pilots, especially Ryan, but pilots speak to members and speak to staff, it goes a long way to making it a direct and sort of personal experience that deserves to be taken seriously.
Do you find that they tend to ask pretty good questions, or how much like stigma do you run into, or jokes about little green men, that kind of thing, or is it by and large the way that you're framing the conversation? They're like, oh, this is serious business.
I think that in general, I found that there are certain folks, for instance, in the Intelligence Committee, the Armed Services Committee, who know a lot about this issue. And so it's not, it's nothing about it is a joke to them. There are other folks who are newer to it. And I think, it's amazing how many people may not have had a serious conversation about UAP before. And so it's unfamiliar, right? And so in that awkwardness, there might be a joke or two, but it resolves pretty quickly once you get into the content of the conversation. So overall, I've been impressed by the response of staffers and also members of Congress who might be new to the issue.
And the ones that the folks on the Senate or in the House that are not new to the topic, that have been looking into this for a while, would you say in general that they understand we're not talking about anything prosaic in terms of balloons, air trash, that kind of thing? The conversation is about the non-prosaic stuff. They are aware of that. Do you get?
That's
would
right.
You agree? Okay, good.
I agree. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It's interesting. The debunkers that I give such a hard time to, they all seem to think, oh, it's these congressmen and women. They're just doing all of this because the staffers have been snowed under. And that's another thing that would you agree on? The staffers that support these men and women in Congress, they are well aware of what's going on in terms of they have the security clearances to look into these things. These aren't just like college kids that are just fresh on Capitol Hill, correct?
Well, especially the committee staff, right? They're, professional staffers. They're extremely senior and tenured, and they make critical decisions about, how policy is going to work and how appropriation is going to work. And they have a lot of information about the issue due to their access. And so, yes, staffers have, an important role in this, but once members of Congress get exposed to the data, they also seem to engage quite seriously with the issue. So no, it's not just one or two staffers, telling stories. It's there's a whole, and in fact, I would say across government, not just in Congress. There are many people who, people who are on SIPRNet or JWIX or various platforms that see things that they find compelling and hard to understand, hard to explain. It makes them curious. And then there are people who see things that give them conviction that we're dealing with truly anomalous UAP.
So now, speaking of Congress, you were actually there for the hearing with Ryan Graves and of course David Grush and Commander Fravor. So that's you in the left there, right?
Yep, that's me. It was a tremendous honor to be there. Yeah.
What are you thinking in that photo? I'm curious. You look like you're either staring at Ryan's water bottle or you're like, what am I getting out of here?
Oh, I was probably a little bit tired. We've been working pretty hard for a few days, but I was, the energy in the room. It was clear that this was a historic moment, and the first thing I would say is that the attendance was, it was well attended, but bipartisan, and it was not the case that members showed up to ask their question for the camera and then leave. Members joined from the beginning and stayed through the entire time. I would also note that it was no one. At least I don't recall anyone politicizing any of the questions or bringing up tangential issues. They were genuinely focused and interested in what the witnesses had to say. And the energy in the room was electric. And that's something that you might not, get from the C-SPAN video, but it was, an incredibly engaged hearing by the members, and especially including some, new folks who hadn't engaged with this issue before. Were really being confronted with it for the first time.
Yeah, something tells me not much electric happens on or gets across the tube on C-SPAN, but I would have loved to have been there. That had to have been very, very exciting. What's David Grush like? Did you get a chance to visit with him? I'm a fanboy.
I would definitely have. Yeah, I would definitely have a beer with that guy. I had a chance to talk to him for a minute behind the, in the waiting room. And I've spoken to him since, and I had, a very favorable impression from the short amount of time that I've spoken with him. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
tremendous energy. Yeah.
It's, certainly, and all of these guys, Commander Fravor, Ryan Graves, all of these folks that have put a lot at stake to come forward to discuss this, to bring it out into the open, and encourage people to have a serious conversation about about this topic. We really owe them a great debt of honor. So, sorry, phone's going off. So let's talk about the commercial air traffic stuff. So how often are pilots, commercial pilots, how often are they running into UAPs?
So, we're probably almost daily, but with a wide variety of characteristics, right? And so we hear that there is still tremendous undersampling going on in terms of like how often this is getting reported to air traffic control, or how often pilots are talking about it with each other. But we have dozens and dozens of reports from commercial pilots who've found us in some fashion and taken the time to write an email to tell us about what they've experienced. So we have to extrapolate to guess at the real numbers. But I think that it's safe to say that every day a pilot is seeing something somewhere, either coming into the United States or leaving, that is hard for them to understand. So, and we're not just talking about Starlink either. Many of these pilots take a lot of time to try to understand what they saw. They're trained observers of the sky. They're very familiar with, where the constellations and the night sky, and also worth noting that not all of the sightings are at night. There are instances of pilots coming to us about things that they've seen during the day, and they're very reluctant to share their stories. Sometimes we get really interesting air traffic control recordings that they've made, but we don't necessarily have the ability to, from the cockpit, right? That we don't have the ability to then share unless we get their permission. But it's happening with remarkable frequency.
Is there any sort of data that indicates that the majority of what the commercial pilots are seeing, and these could be corporate pilots, airline pilots, is there any data that would suggest they're observing it more across, on the water, for instance, coming in on the West Coast, or is it mostly overland?
No, I would say that there's a slight, I don't have the exact data, but there seems to be slightly more over water, specifically around Hawaii is probably where we get the most reports. And then also in approaches to JFK and parts of New England that seem to have a higher concentration of reports. But that being said, we do receive reports from all over the continental United States as well. Fewer international. We're primarily hearing from pilots flying in and around the United States.
So these pilots that observe this stuff, are they afraid to report this to their employer, the air carrier themselves?
Yes, there's almost zero reporting to the airlines themselves. Pilots indicate that it's extremely rare for a pilot to put it on the company messaging board or share it with other folks in the sort of corporate aspects of the airline. So I would say there's virtually zero discussion, between pilots and airlines. They have very little incentive to do that.
There's probably quite a bit of incentive, to just kind of keep it in the cockpit. It's like, hey, let's not talk about what we just saw. Do you think
that's been the culture too for a long time, right? That pilots would see things, and some of the older pilots, they've had a career of sometimes seeing some strange things, and the culture was, let's just, it doesn't need to be discussed. Maybe that's a military thing. They kind of wave it off. But the younger pilots, I think, are more curious. And interestingly, the pilots that are closest to retirement are also the more willing to speak about what they're encountering. But yes, there's been a history of stigma. We're aware of pilots experiencing retaliation up to and including cease and desist letters to not talk about it publicly. And so if you scroll to the bottom of the bill, you'll find it's the sense of Congress that this is totally unacceptable is basically what it says. I just have to say, from speaking with dozens of pilots myself, stigma is a huge issue, and it's not fear of social retaliation. It's not fear of being ridiculed. It's fear of professional consequences and career consequences. The loss of flight time, having people questioning your mental health, and it's a serious issue for these folks. So it's a problem.
So for instance, would it be like the chief pilot of an airline? Would he or she call in that person on the line to describe what happened, and then they would decide whether or not they're mentally, how exactly does that work? And what I mean by that is in the negative sense. Are they sent to an FAA flight surgeon typically? Like what have been sort of, other than like the cease and desist, what have been some of the
Right.
consequences to some of these pilots that have reported it, and then in the end they're like, oh man, I should have never opened my mouth?
I have fewer cases. I don't have a lot of instances where pilots have experienced direct retaliation, but the fear of retaliation is very strong, right? So I'm not, I don't have 3 pilots that have, lost their flight status because they told someone at the airline. That's, but my understanding is that they're extremely afraid to, share those reports for fear of retaliation. And then when they speak publicly, that can attract the attention of the airlines and, tell them to stop. Basically. So, and there is a tremendous, one thing that's working in their favor, there's a tremendous shortage of pilots right now. And so, there is a little bit more supply and demand has a role in this too. But yeah, so I would say it's mostly on the, administrative side. But we do hear from pilots that that's a tremendous concern for them. What's the upside in, calling the chief pilot when, things could happen. So with a larger sample size, I could probably tell you more.
So it's not like Delta Airlines is going to start handing out bonuses to pilots for reporting their UAP encounters.
No, I mean they don't want pilots to be distracted, right? And because to the extent that something's in view in the cockpit, it can be a distraction, and they're they're interested in the pilot staying focused on the safety of the passengers and navigation. So the airlines are not particularly interested in UAP reporting.
Well, and for me, it's like when I hear about this, it's like the pilots, they are there, to fly the airplane, but also to protect your safety. So if there's something flying around them that it shouldn't be in that airspace, is that not an air safety concern? Is that not something the public should be concerned about, and our lawmakers?
Absolutely. And, the reason that we hear from pilots is because they're concerned, right? I mean, that's the only reason that we're having this conversation. And they're frustrated, not just concerned about what they're seeing, but they're frustrated that there, wasn't a reporting option that they felt was, confidential and being taken seriously. And so the existing process, very haphazard, and suboptimal for sure. And that frustration, I think, is what really brought pilots to reach out to us and to kind of raise our awareness of this problem.
And this sort of haphazard sort of reporting mechanism, does this sit within the FAA presently?
Yeah. So what happens today is if a commercial pilot sees something and they want to say something, I think typically they don't, but if they choose to, they'll call it into air traffic control and say, hey, I'm seeing X or Y or Z, or there's something I'm observing, off the aircraft. And the interaction with air traffic control is very much at the discretion of the controller. If they're interested and they want to collect more information, they might do so. In some cases, that they will, but imagine when the air traffic controller is like, hey, that sounds very strange. Let me check with my supervisor. And then they say, hey, can you give me your cell phone so that you can text the photo that you just took to my supervisor, right? I mean, it's very haphazard. And then what happens from there is still at the discretion of air traffic control. So if they want to submit a report to Aero, they can. There are not that many of those. But they're already task saturated. I mean, if you could become an air traffic controller today, you'd have a great career. It's a great job, but there are very few of them compared to the need. They're very task saturated, and it's not the top of their priority list. And I don't think any air traffic control supervisor is keen on having a controller, just making lots of UAP reports when they come in. They're focused on dealing with the aircraft. So it's very much a coalition of the willing, in the sense that the pilot has to be willing to call it out on the radio. The air traffic controller has to be willing to do some investigation, and then has to take the effort and the initiative to, forward it along. But I believe there was a recent FOIA request made to the FAA, asking just, hey, can you give us a list of the cases that, you received? And if my memory serves, the response was, we don't keep track of that. We don't know who to ask. It could be happening all over the place.
Nothing to see
Go
here.
Go ask Aero. They don't know. So, and hopefully I'm doing that justice, but that's my recollection of the situation.
Now there was something I don't quite remember what it was. It was, I think, towards the tail of last year, where Congressman Tim Burchett tried to put forth some legislation dealing with UAP and the FAA. What was that exactly?
Yeah, so that was an interesting bill that called on the FAA to disclose basically all cases that had anomalous features, and assess, if I recall correctly, any threats that it might pose. And I believe the congressman said that the intelligence committee killed it. The intelligence community killed it. I think at a technical level, the Rules Committee said it shouldn't be attached to the FAA authorization bill. It's more of an intelligence bill, and it needs to go somewhere else. But it got killed. And so, from my perspective, it's a good approach. But we still need that actual reporting process before there's anything to disclose. The current status is the FAA doesn't even store or preserve records, or collect the basic investigation of those cases. So, one step, get the reporting, and then two, get the disclosure.
Got it. Okay, so let's get into this bill. Let's see. I have it. I think I have it up here. Let's see. All right. All right. So here it is. Walk us through this bill.
Yeah, sure. Well, let me give you the high level first, and then as we go through it, I think that'll give you some of the context. So, first of all, this is a bipartisan bill, introduced, as you said, by Robert Garcia, Democrat in California, and Rep. Grothman, Glenn Grothman, Republican from Wisconsin, and they're the chair and the ranking member of the National Security Subcommittee of the House Oversight Committee, which is where Ryan and the Davids testified back in July. And so overall, what the legislation does is it provides a direct and confidential reporting channel for civilian pilots by adapting the widely trusted NASA aviation safety reporting system, which, by the way, makes all of its reports publicly available. And it's been, I think, over 100. Yeah, and over 100, then there's a database, anyone can look through it. The reports are de-identified, so the pilots have confidentiality. And there are over 100,000 reports that have been put into this system. So that's the first thing it does, is it directs the program manager of the, under the hood, it directs the NASA, but the program manager for this to either amend the existing form to take UAP reports or to create a new form that's dedicated to UAP. And then just briefly, and then we can go through the details, a couple other key things that the legislation does. It protects pilots against any kind of retaliation for reporting UAP, specifically, their flight status. And then it instructs the FAA to collect and preserve data and share those reports with AERO, which has been a missing, kind of link in this chain. And then also directs, and I think this is pretty critical, directs the FAA to develop a public engagement strategy to encourage reporting. So yeah, let's go through it. But I just wanted to give you like that quick high level of what it's trying to do in totality.
And actually, before we dig into this, how long has this been in the works? I would imagine something like this is not an easy thing to draft.
No, but if you go back to Ryan's testimony in July, this was the first thing he asked for from Congress. He said, let's allow for a direct and safe reporting option for pilots so we can get the data. So at the very beginning of the hearings, if memory serves, Garcia and Grothman indicated that they did expect bipartisan legislation to emerge from these hearings. And they could have been referring to multiple things, but we have been working with Garcia's office and others since that time on this bill. So it's been, a number of months of effort. It's been through technical review with the Department of Defense already and come back. A lot of effort has gone into it, for sure.
So Representative Grothman and Garcia, why did you approach them in particular? Was there a previous interest in the UAP topic with them? I'm just curious their connection.
Well, we had the chance to meet with both of them prior to the hearing. So we've been, doing meetings in advance in DC, and I'm not aware that they had prior connections to this issue. And but Ryan and myself and Haley, had the chance to meet with them and many other members and their staffs. But in both of these meetings, we were focused on the hearings, but then discussing the problems that aviators were experiencing. They both expressed interest in trying to find solutions, and so we've been working with them since. And one of our goals at Americans for Safe Aerospace is to try to expand the number of champions in Congress, right? And bring new folks into this issue. And I think the hearings did that. It's not just us. This is just a team effort. But, having those direct meetings and having pilots tell the story is a critical piece of that. And so, I think we were able to frame the issue in a straightforward way that could start with a straightforward solution. And there are other policy priorities that we have, but this is a really good place to start. And it's important to get a lot of consensus behind this as we move forward.
So, and as someone here that clearly didn't watch enough Schoolhouse Rock as a kid, how does this go into an NDAA? Like legislatively, what are the mechanics, or is this a standalone bill that would pass on? I mean, how does that work? I should know the
Sure.
answer, but I don't.
No, it's a great question. So right now it's a standalone bill, and it would be great if it can pass as a standalone bill. For better or worse, this Congress doesn't pass a lot of bills, so sometimes the
Yeah.
legislative strategy can change. Right now, this has been a
Right.
uniquely bipartisan issue, so I wouldn't rule out the possibility of it passing as a standalone bill. The two other obvious vehicles would be the FAA reauthorization, which is still in process, but this bill does touch upon armed services and other committees that have jurisdiction. So, it may or may not be possible to get it through FAA. Another obvious or, high profile vehicle would be the NDAA. And, that process is already getting started for, next year. Most of the drafting, I think, will be happening in March. And since it's an election year, probably get finished around October or something like that. So very much the season for next year's NDAA.
Excellent. Well, I would say do yourself a favor and keep Representative Mike Turner away from this thing. We know what he likes to do. So yes.
Well, I'd love to get his support. So if he's listening, Mike, we'd love to meet with you and tell you why we think this is a really pragmatic way to get started on the issue.
I love that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we need to get him on our team. That is for sure.
That's right.
So maybe walk us through. Not Team Lockheed Martin. Let's get him on Team America. So why don't you walk us through some of the more important elements of the bill? I do have it here. I can bring up certain pages if you like.
Yeah, sure.
Whatever is the best way of going about it.
Yeah, well, let's go ahead and pull it up, and we can just walk through it together. So I'm rather, the title has a nice ring to it, Safe Airspace for Americans Act. I think that's a noble goal. But yeah, let's keep scrolling. So this is kind of directed to the administrator of the FAA in terms of establishing procedures and reporting for UAP. So specifically, like in all of the details are pretty interesting, but it gives the FAA 180 days to begin to develop procedures internally to standardize the collection, reporting, analysis of incidents, and obviously with specific interest in any kind of adverse physiological effects to pilots or interference with flight instruments, such as autopilot getting disabled or anything like that. And making this available as a reporting, not just commercial pilots, but also civilian pilots and folks that work, in aviation. So, even going back to let's say the 2006 O'Hare case, this bill would have provided a mechanism for those folks, on the ground to make reports through the ASRS system. Hey, there's something over there that shouldn't be there. Right. And so, that's how the bill kind of gets started.
Got it. Okay.
We can kind of scroll, but basically that we're asking the FAA also to begin to collect some of the data that comes in so that it's not just passing through, but actually being preserved. And finally, evaluating any threats that, incidents might pose to the safety of airspace. So that's the first piece in terms of like what it's trying to achieve. And it's not, we're not asking the FAA to do this alone. I think that section talks about, if you scroll back up for a second,
sure,
coordinating with other intelligence agencies and, other folks to help, the DNI, Department of Homeland Security, NOAA, the National Science Foundation, and coordinating with these other departments to try to triangulate data, but then critically, because that there is this UAP office at Aero, which I'm sure we could talk about, to make sure that these reports don't end up in just another silo. So we'll get them publicly, but then also make sure that they go to Aero with some of the supporting data so that they can have a look at that. And then the section D here is the prohibition against any kind of enforcement. So it's very similar to how the aviation safety reporting system works today. When you report through NASA ASRS, you're protected against, if you made a minor safety violation and you self-disclose it, you have protection against adverse enforcement. And same deal here. This is part of the key, protections for pilots, that if they do choose to report UAP, that report won't be the basis for enforcement against them. So you can keep scrolling.
Okay.
And then, communication strategies. So this section deals with how to decrease stigma, right? And to develop a public engagement strategy to, encourage use of the reporting system. And the next section, deals with the reporting system itself. So and there's some, I'm talking about NASA and I'm talking about FAA. So maybe pause for 1 second and just explain how this works. So the FAA is the owner of the aviation safety reporting system. So it's an FAA system. But as a practical matter, it's administered by NASA. And they're considered a trusted, neutral third party, right? And so they operate the system. There's a program manager there that I think we've been in touch with for over a year, who is responsible for, running that program. So it's jointly administered. So when we talk about NASA ASRS, it is an FAA system. So just to connect those two dots for you.
Got it.
We can go back to the bill. So this directs the administrator to decide whether they're going to use the existing form or make a new and separate form for the purpose of these reports, and provide some details around that. But basically, to preserve a little bit of choice in terms of how this gets implemented. And there are some details, there are some differences in how, and you might be like, what's the purpose of this? Well, today it's a little bit in the weeds, but every report is de-identified even before it goes into the database. So certain information gets stripped out. And it may be the case that the program manager will want to give pilots the option to provide their contact information should, investigators want to follow up, and just have sort of a separate process for, folks that are willing to have follow up about their case. So giving some discretion in terms of how it's implemented, but we'll be very keen to see, how that unfolds. And by the way, this reporting system was, I think it was first recommended by the AIAA as a policy recommendation that was brought forward a year ago. And then it was also the recommendation of the NASA UAP independent study team. So, folks like Mike Gold, who's one of our advisors, pointed this out, that, as part of that study team, that there really wasn't an official channel for commercial pilots and civilian pilots to make these reports. And it was a data source that they wished they had. And in their final report, says it's self-evident that there's an aviation safety issue here, and therefore let's adapt. There's some work to adapt it, but let's adapt the NASA ASRS system. So I think we've got the right platform. It's already trusted by pilots. It's the reporting platform of choice from folks that have spent some time looking at this issue. There are other ways to do it, but this is a good one.
Got it. Okay. Let's see. So moving on here, we'll go to 5.
So just system requirements. So this is just touching on the need that the form include specific fields to handle the kinematics of the object. So, just what did the pilot see? How is it moving in relation to the aircraft? And make sure that that's, made clear that, they're looking for this information. And then the manner of submission just allows them to submit from the electronic flight bag. So the electronic flight bag is a glorified iPad that's in the cockpit.
Right.
And it's the only approved device that pilots are supposed to be using in the cockpit. So technically, if you take it, and there's one clever pilot I talked to who did bring it to his airline, did have some problems with that, but he was chastised for using a personal device in the cockpit, and he pointed out he did not use a personal device. He used the electronic flight bag, right? He used the iPad or whatever. So maybe that's a way to skirt the rules. But more seriously, to be able to make those reports, directly from the cockpit if they choose to in real time, so it's just the method of submission. It's also possible to submit the report later.
Got it. Okay.
And so this just says, like, as long as it's safe to do so, then they're welcome to do that. And then the next section, obviously, same with the lack of use for enforcement action, the protection of medical certificates. So, using reporting UAP shouldn't be the basis for losing your flight status.
I'm all for that.
Yeah,
because that at the end of the day, that's, I'm sure, the big, their big concern is losing their flight status, and one incident could certainly trigger that. Okay, so let's see here. Oops, sorry. I gotta go back to here. And okay, so moving on.
and that's a difference. Like, military pilots, we understand, are often concerned about, like, the loss of flight time if they have to sit through extensive debriefings for reporting UAP. But yeah, for commercial pilots, it's just about their their medical and their air certifications.
Right.
So this is all the protections. Some of the details there.
Page 6 here. So that so prohibition on reprisals for federal employees and contractors. So again, just more whistleblower protection language.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is really trying to cover all the bases. The lawyers did, legal counsel did a lot of this, right? But just covering, any potential avenue for retaliation against folks who make these reports.
Okay. And let's see, section 7 here.
Yeah, here we get specific. Can't terminate folks for making these reports, and can't issue cease and desist letters for for making these reports either. And I actually find this sense of Congress language to be very powerful, because it is expressing the intention of the legislators. That all UAPs should be reported, especially if there's any kind of aviation safety or national security concern. And I'll just pause there for a second. I think it's been widely acknowledged by the Air Force and others that you have what they call a domain awareness gap, particularly in the area of 40,000 to 80,000 feet, like this gray zone between the altitude the commercial jets are flying and space. And, for instance, the Chinese spy balloon, not to choose something that's charged, but, that would have been clearly visible to commercial pilots if they were close enough. It was even visible from the ground. It'd be very visible for commercial pilots. So this category of, like, balloons and very high altitude UAS and just other things that are hard to explain, it's the sense of Congress that there's a national security benefit to getting those reports, in addition to the obvious aviation safety implications of unidentified objects in that airspace. Okay,
let's see here. So moving on, I think, so we've covered 7, correct? All of 7?
Yep. And then, this moves just into the definitions. This is the standard UAP definition that we've seen in the NDAA. So it's a, broadly written, right? But, objects that aren't immediately identifiable, transmedium objects, which would include submerged objects, right? Not the focus of the reporting here. But this is just the definition of UAP that's being used in legislation right now.
Got it. Okay. All right. Well, fantastic. Well, congratulations to you, Ryan, and everyone else that was involved with getting this legislation passed forward. Hopefully we can get these congressmen on our show to talk about it. I mean, it's amazing how much this whole thing has grown. I mean, like 5 years ago, I would have never thought that we would be where we are now. And while it is obviously unfortunate that the UAP Disclosure Act did get stripped, it is encouraging to see that there is still work being done in terms of legislation to tackle this topic, and that wasn't the end all be all. That particular legislation that our friend Mike Turner, I guess, had a hand in stripping that down. So if you have a few more minutes, I'd love to get to a few listener questions.
Absolutely. Just one thing I want to say.
Sure.
That bill is not dead. There are still folks fighting for some of the key provisions that were stripped out. And I think we're going to be hearing more about that throughout the year. And I don't know exactly how that will manifest, as something standalone or as something that comes back in next year's NDAA. But that conversation is still happening. And so any forward momentum we have in Congress is going to be, complementary to those efforts. So for what it's worth, don't give up on that. People are still fighting for it. And, we'll see.
So you basically you're saying that the UAP Disclosure Act, the stuff that was stripped out, could live to see another day.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, look, I wasn't as closely involved with it as others, but we did make a call to action to get folks to call in to our 12,000 members and to our, I think we had over 2 million views on that call to action when it went out. And so I have some ongoing discussions related to it. And the Civilian Review Board is still a really important concept. There are still people who see the need for it. Eminent domain, there are differences of opinion about whether that's the right legal theory. Whether you've read the original, have the original transfer agreements. Was there actually a legal transfer of ownership? Was there just a de facto? There are some questions there about should we have to pay defense contractors to get stuff back that the government already owns, right? So, but yeah, those conversations are still happening, and I'm optimistic that we'll see the stronger provisions for transparency come up again, without guessing the probability of it passing like this. There are people fighting for it, so.
It's a totally separate question, and I know this would be pure speculation. What do you think is going to be in David Grush's op-ed?
Hopefully a little bit more. Haven't seen it. I would love to see it, but if I had seen it, I probably wouldn't be stealing his thunder.
Right.
But I'm hopeful that we'll hear more about his direct experiences, and maybe firsthand experiences with this. But I'm as eager to see it as anybody else.
Yeah, I tell you what, that guy is truly an American patriot in every sense of the word, and just amazing what he's done and what others are doing to move this topic forward and try and wrestle it away from the stigma and all the secrecy that's surrounded this thing. Okay, listener questions. Our friend David Smethurst, we love Dave. Do Americans for a Safe Aerospace plan to liaise with Aero on reporting issues and widening signals surveillance on commercial flight paths? I think you touched on that a little bit earlier, but maybe you could go into a little bit more depth on that.
Sure. Yeah. So our witness program, I mentioned that we refer, and let me first say this just to set the ground for a witness program. When we work with witnesses, we ask them what their goals are and we ask them what they want to do with their case. And so we never share information without their permission. We never refer their case unless they want to take it to a certain destination. So we've had some witnesses go to the Senate Armed Services Committee. We've had other witnesses who have wanted to take their case to Aero, and so we have, made those introductions, and those interviews have happened, and that in some cases that data has been, shared. And so, yes, we're in active dialogue with them about, commercial pilot reporting issues, and I'm optimistic that this bill will substantially improve the quality and the quantity of the reports that they're getting and make them a little bit more actionable compared to the more haphazard system that exists today. Did that address the question, or was there another part to it?
Yeah. Okay. This is from Incorruptus. I like that. Question: would it be great to add more FLIR systems or make them roulade? I think he's saying routine on planes and traffic routes that are most likely to have UAP sightings on them. Can that be done? So essentially, he's asking, I think, is there any chance that commercial aviation will implement FLIR to record this stuff? I would be kind of surprised if that were to occur.
Unfortunately, the state of the art is that there are some pilots going renegade and attaching GoPros to the front of the cockpit, but no, there's no. I would be thrilled if commercial jets had the kinds of sensors that our, their military colleagues have. Unfortunately, they're pretty much operating under what they can see. So it would be tremendously helpful if, planes could have some sensors, but, it's not something that I'm expecting in the near future.
Yeah, I would be very surprised. It's a great idea, but I'm not sure
It'd
that
be awesome.
it,
Yeah.
it totally would be. Okay, another one from our friend David Smethurst here. Would a legal duty on commercial airlines and pilots to report UAP be helpful? In other words, I think what he's saying here, would it be helpful if there were a legal requirement if a pilot or any flight crew were to observe UAP during a flight, that it is mandatory to report it? Would holding their feet to the fire, do you think that would help, or would that cause too much sort of backlash?
I've thought deeply about this, and I've asked, I think, at least a dozen pilots this specific question. And the feedback that I have heard almost across the board is that pilots don't want to be told exactly what they have to do in the cockpit. Right. And so if you make it another, and they're, they don't like having to fill out lots of reports on every flight. And there's a risk that if we, made it mandatory with enforcement, that you would actually get backlash where pilots are like, hey, this is just another thing being imposed upon me. Whereas if you give them a really easy option in a reporting system that they already use, hopefully we can get a lot more, participation in that system. So I'm of the opinion that it's better to keep it voluntary. But maybe for the airlines, there should be some mandatory component for them. But I think at least for pilots, better to let it be volunteer.
Okay. Spin Dub Tracks. For those looking to help advocate for this legislation, it's a great question here. Where do you suggest they focus their efforts? Will ASA have a contact form? Will they collaborate with a UAP caucus to help declassify UAP?
Yeah, well, Lester and Ronak are awesome UAP caucus guys. I was speaking with them just earlier, about this issue, and so we're, absolutely love the grassroots support. I mean, for the moment, I would invite, people to consider joining Americans for Safe Aerospace. You can do it at safeaerospace.org. We have almost 12,000 members. And one of the reasons we do that and have this member strategy, it's very helpful when we're talking to Congress and we say, hey, look, we've got, we believe that we're the largest and fastest growing UAP organization on the planet, and this should be taken seriously. And so everyone who adds their name to our organization, gets counted when we're talking to Congress. But as we make progress, I do think we'll invite people to, working with UAP caucus and other groups to, call and write relevant members of Congress to try to move the ball forward. So, people are welcome to do it at any time. But if we have a specific, window and specific members that we'd encourage them to reach out to, we'll absolutely make that call to action.
Okay, another great question from David Smethurst here. Are ASA concerned about the intelligence community efforts to suppress the reporting of UAP incidents and frequency to the general public? Would it be the impact? What would be the impact of this if they did? And I think that kind of falls back into maybe what Congressman Tim Burchett was talking about in terms of the intelligence community squashing what he was proposing in terms of mandating that the FAA reveal what they know. Do you think that is a risk?
Oh, there's definitely a risk that there will be pushback to this bill. The only thing that I can say is that if it has been through technical review, at least with the Department of Defense, we've received some feedback from them. I'm not aware that it's been through a technical review with any of the intelligence, constituencies. But, for the most part, intelligence agencies are not observing the continental United States. That's off limits for them. So we'll just have to see. But yes, there's a risk that folks will oppose this, and the public nature of, how all of these reports will be available to the public. But until it happens, I don't know. And just worth remembering, we were strongly supportive of the Disclosure Act as a key means to get all UAP records across government out to the public. So any record that we can get marked as a UAP record today is going to get preserved, and there's a chance that as hopefully with some follow-up legislation we can get it all out there. So, but yes, it's certainly out there as a concern.
Hopefully they'll keep their fingers out of it. Are you optimistic in general for 2024 in terms of what is going to develop in terms of UAP?
I am. I'm incredibly optimistic. I'm optimistic about the momentum in Congress, about the number of champions that are emerging. I'm optimistic from just what I hear from witnesses, and I have indirectly optimistic about whistleblowers as well. That hopefully we'll be hearing from more of those. So yes, I'm just across the board optimistic. I mean, if the Disclosure Act had been passed as written, that would have been absolutely amazing. But we still have work to do, and so we'll get to work.
Well, you guys are really doing incredible work. So how can people support what you guys are up to, spread the word, all that sort of thing? How can we find yourself, Brad, and then also how can we support Americans for Safe Aerospace? Where can we find all of that?
Sure. So to join us, it's safeaerospace.org. And you just add your name, and to follow us on Twitter at Safe Aerospace. I'm at Brad Crispin, and everyone who joins us gets counted. And we love to mention the number when we're meeting with members of Congress. So if there's one thing I'd ask folks to do, it's go to our website and sign up, follow us on Twitter, and support us as we move forward. And we'll get very specific about calls to action once we really know where it's going to count. So, but yes, we're really hopeful that people will get excited about this bill and support it, as well as the other things that are going to be happening in Congress through the rest of the year.
Absolutely. And actually, a question popped up. I know we were supposed to be done with questions, but this is a really good one. We'll end on this.
Let's do it.
Hi, has there been any discussion about the data from satellites that David Grush mentioned in the congressional hearing when he was under oath? Has it been submitted to Congress? Actually, that's a little bit off what you guys are doing, but I don't know. Have you heard anything about that? That is a great question.
I'll rely on public statements by some of our advisors, like Chris Mellon, to suggest that it hasn't. But that's not and I would also say that I don't believe there's a lot of UAP reporting from the Space Force. So I think those are two safe assumptions, but it's not something I have direct involvement with.
Got it. Okay, well, Brad, thank you very much for joining us. Folks, if you enjoyed this show, please give a thumbs up, all that good stuff. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Our apologies to Congressman Tim Burchett, who was going to join us, but maybe next time. So, Brad, thank you very much, and we will see you soon, and congratulations on this legislation.
Thanks, Matt. It was awesome to be on. I really appreciate it.
Okay. All right, guys, we'll see you soon.